lectures too. He seems to like being on screen, so we can add to that list of things that are part of his accidental properties, being a bit of a camera whore. Anyhow, the opening book of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics starts with a puzzle, and we'll find this throughout the Nicomachean Ethics. There are a series of puzzles that Aristotle is attempting to solve with this book of ethics. And he basically starts this book by presenting us with two alternatives. Either everything is a means to an end, and that end a means to a further end, and that end a means to some further end, and so on and so forth. And if we think about this, what would that mean for us? Everything I choose is a means to an end. I did well in grade school to have the building blocks for learning to be present in high school. I did well in high school so that I could get into a decent university. I did well in university so that I could get into grad school. I did well in grad school so that I could get a teaching position. I get a teaching position so that someday I'll get tenure. I want tenure so that someday I'll be paid for my research. I want to be paid for my research because I prefer to stay at home and perhaps raise a family while working, right? And so on and so forth, right? I want a family because, etc., 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 right? Well, his point with this alternative is that if everything that we choose is as an end is a means to some further end, then nothing we ever choose will ever finally satisfy us, and all desiring will be in vain, right? If I want to get up to go out, I want to go out to exercise, I want to exercise to be healthy, I want to be healthy to live longer, I want to live longer to etc., 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 etc. So, right, if that's the case, then all of our choosing would be in vain. So our lives would be meaningless. Or, everything that we choose as an end is not a means to some further end. What would this alternative mean? Well, what he's positing here is an end in itself, something we choose for its own sake, for the sake of which we choose everything else that we choose, which we never choose for the sake of something else, which, if we had it, would be so self-sufficient that we could want nothing further. Right? So an end in itself that we never choose for the sake of something else. What would that look like? Well, Aristotle claims that we've already got a name for it. Happiness. Right? It's why we do all of the other things that we do, which we'd never do for the sake of something else, which, if we had it, we'd be all set. We would need nothing further. Right? We all want to be happy. It doesn't make sense to ask the question, why do we want to be happy? Because it's happiness. Because it's an end in itself. Right? And why do I do all of the other things that I do? Why do I do well in school? Because I want to be happy. Why do I get into a relationship? Because I want to be happy. Why do I have a cat? Why do I have a cat? Huh, Sheldon? Right? Because I want to be happy. Why do I, wear the clothing that I wear, drive the car that I drive, do the work that I do? Because I want to be happy. But here's the embarrassing point. What's happiness? What's happiness? It's the reason all of us get out of bed in the morning. It's the reason that we do all of the other things that we do. It's the final end or goal of all human endeavor. Right? It's the final reason that stands behind every action that we perform. And we don't know what it is. So, what Aristotle is going to do with the Nicomachean Ethics is define it and give us somewhat of a football strategy for how to get it. Alright? Sorry there, Sheldon. Aristotle claims on page 2 of your copy of the Nicomachean Ethics here, mine in fairly bad shape, That, here it is, right? Then does knowledge of this good carry great weight for our way of life, and would it make us better able, just like archers who have a target to aim at, to hit the right mark? If so, we should try to grasp and outline at any rate what the good is and what is its proper science or capacity. All right? So, the good. All right? The final end or goal to all of human endeavor. Aristotle's going to try and define it for us. Right? What is happiness? It makes good sense to ask this question. Right? And he begins by examining sort of commonsensical kind of ideas for happiness. These are the four big ideas of what happiness is that are culturally possible. This is what most people think. He's going to start by examining what most people think, because we all want it. We can't be all the way wrong, can we? So, he lays out the four big lives right behind me here. Right? They are pleasure, the public life, the theoretical life, and finally the life of a moneymaker. Right? He does this in a section called Three Lives. Right? Sort of annoyingly, the title, in which he examines four lives. So the first one, pleasure. Right? This is the sort of sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of attitude towards life. Right? If it feels good, do it. If it doesn't, avoid it. Right? And this is generally what some people think happiness is. Interesting theory. Then the public life. I usually think of this as the sort of Paris Hilton manner of living our lives. Right? Or if we think of it another way, what was Willy Loman's advice to his son Biff? What's the most important thing in life, Biff? Being well liked. Right? The life of honor, or the public life. Geez, Sheldon, calm it down, buddy. Right? And that would be happiness. How many friends do you have on Facebook? Right? The third life would be the life of theory, the theoretical life. Right? And its end would be understanding. Right? And then finally, the life of the moneymaker. Right? But if we really think what this end or goal is supposed to do, what is it supposed to accomplish for us? It's supposed to solve this chain of means and ends here, right? It's got to be an end in itself. What does this mean? It's got to be complete. It's got to completely satisfy us. It's got to be self-sufficient. If we had it, we would need nothing further. And we're talking about human happiness. Not cat happiness. That's right, Sheldon. We're not talking about you. We're not talking about dog happiness. We're not talking about horse happiness. We're not talking about any other sort of happiness. We're talking about something that's distinctively human. So, happiness is something that, according to Aristotle, is distinctively human. Right? So these are the criteria that we have to evaluate happiness based on. So, if we take a look at these four lives, annoyingly, right, we find that most of them fail to satisfy one of these criteria. Pleasure, right? The end of a life of enjoyment. Well, Sheldon here experiences pleasure. Don't you, boy? Don't you, boy? Big scratch on the belly, that sort of thing. He also licks himself, right? Which, you know, it's kind of hard to, you know, claim that an animal doesn't experience pleasure. Alright? So, the first life, pleasure, not distinctively human. So, it can't be happiness. How about the public life, the life of honor, right? Being well liked, like Willy Loman's advice claims. Well, the problem with that, being well liked generally has something more to do with other people than anything that emanates from you. You require something other than yourself, right? The honor or adoration of other people, right? So it's not self-sufficient. About the theoretical life, he says we'll talk about that later, and he does in one of the much later books in the Nicomachean Ethics. So, for now, put a set of square brackets around that and put it out of your mind. Right? And then finally, the